Welcome to episode 16 of Mental Mastery, where I interview the world's greatest minds on what it takes to live an epic life. I'm your host, Max Weigand, and today I'm joined by Taylor Kreiss, who has dedicated his life to studying the art and science of happiness. In addition to receiving degrees in philosophy and positive psychology, Taylor spent 3 years as the executive producer of the popular Psychology podcast, and now teaches people how to live better lives. So Taylor, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Max. I'm thrilled to be here, man. I take every opportunity I can to talk on these topics.
Oh, love that. Really excited for this. So we're talking a little bit before, and you mentioned that you moved to Thailand as part of your well-being plan. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had spent 3 months of last year in Thailand just trying to satisfy my wanderlust, and just about immediately fell in love with the place and decided I need to be back here pretty soon. And it occurred to me that being able to live in Thailand and work from my computer costs maybe $400 to $500 a month to live here. And with those, wow. I know, right? It's amazing. I think that even just the average rent in America has gotten to $1,600 a month or something like that. It's out of control. But when you cut down on your overhead to that extent, it gives you the opportunity to almost exclusively do work that you enjoy a little more. I don't need to be somewhere 9 to 5 or working in a job that dictates all of my time. I can do my writing and my coaching and focus on writing my first book, basically, and dictate my own schedule.
Wow, that's so cool. So many questions right there. So first of all, how's your life changed like after moving there? Like, are there any differences in like your daily schedule, your daily life?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I don't need to be anywhere really ever. It's one of the great virtues of my lifestyle is when I wake up in the morning, I can start the day with doing some Muay Thai or some weightlifting, and that primes me for more happiness and productivity as I go about the rest of the things I want to do, which could include maybe getting a massage for like $6 US, which is crazy.
Wow.
Right. Or I try to keep a mindfulness practice on a daily basis, and I can do that whenever I feel like it rather than needing to rush during lunch or waiting until after work. I can do that at like 3 p.m. I'll usually like to try and write over the next 4 or 5 hours from there and finish the night, I guess, doing what everybody does, which is just binging on Netflix and eating too much food.
Well, it sounds like you're definitely living life kind of on your terms and doing exactly what you want to do whenever you want to do it. That's really amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think it's a good way to put it. I mean, there's pros and cons to the lifestyle also. I think that one of the things I've learned about happiness and the good life in general is that it's highly individualized. We all have a different version of what makes us happiest. For some people, that is the 9 to 5. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think at times it'd be good for me to be able to show up at work and have more structure and be able to leave it off of my mind as you get home.
So what are some ways that you use in addition, because I know you talk a lot about simplifying your life and just kind of getting rid of all the distractions. So what are some ways that you've done that in your life outside of just moving to Thailand?
It's amazing how often I refer to Tim Ferriss's ideas. I think that they really struck me at a time in my life when I was impressionable. But one of the things I do is I very rigorously strip down the kind of information I absorb. You know, he talks about cultivating ignorance with respect to a lot of information that ordinarily we just kind of absorb in a willy-nilly, indiscriminate kind of way. And as an example of what I mean, I don't have news apps on my phone.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I do too, especially nowadays. It seems like in America, everything is so hectic and everybody's running around on fire. It's, it'll stress you out if you constantly have notifications popping up on your phone that Trump has done this or Trump has done that. And I just cut that out of my life entirely fairly recently. And I can't tell you the effects it's had on my overall well-being, just because there's less catastrophe all the time, and then just the amount of free time I have. Because you'd be amazed how often you get a notification and all of a sudden you're not writing anymore, you're not working out, you're not doing what you meant to do. Instead, you're just off on a tangent that's kind of been dictated by the world making its way into your life.
Oh, for sure. I love that. That has actually also been one of the biggest shifts in my life, just kind of getting rid of news that because the reality is most of the times news don't impact your life in whatsoever, right? I mean,
Right.
most things that like we can get bombarded with of the latest drama of like some celebrity gossip or whatever, they have zero impact on your life, and yet most people spend like hours a day like wasting their lives with this useless stuff just because it's like this immediate gratification of getting news and being able to gossip, right? But like since I've like got rid of it, I have so much more free time. So I definitely agree with what you're saying here. Like it just kind of frees you up to actually do the things that matter to you.
Yeah, this celebrity news example is a wonderful one. I'll have to remember that.
The thing that I've done is I get rid of my phone like throughout the workday. It's like I don't even look at like messages or anything like that. So that way I'm not constantly interrupted every 5 minutes by like some weird message by someone. But instead, after I'm done with the work, then I get out my phone and look at what is going on.
Yeah, I have website blockers on my computer. I try and put my phone away and on silent as often as possible when I need to get into an optimized state of flow or find deep work, as Cal Newport might put it. It's amazing. It takes you maybe 10 minutes sometimes to get primed even on writing an article. Like you got to remember all these little pieces of information and the structure that you want to write, and you're trying to think of a funny hook, how you're going to articulate some complex idea. And then you get a text message and, you know,
it's all gone.
Yeah, and then it all disappears. And then, I'm texting my friend Lucas, and then when I'm back at work, I've forgotten everything I needed to get ready, and I got to do it all over again. And it's just a tremendous time drain.
Oh, for sure. I forgot to. Oh, I think it was Robin Sharma who said you kind of create this tight bubble of total focus where you block out everything else around you, right? Whether it's friends or family wanting anything from you, coworkers, whatever it is, block out everything and focus entirely on what exactly you want to do. And then finish that, and then after that, spend time whatever you're doing, and then you're gonna free up so much of your time because this multitasking epidemic that we're in nowadays is just horrific for our productivity.
It's hard because I feel like, I see my little brother and sister from the time they were 3 were on their iPads already, and it's the default mode of the human mind as far as technology has affected us in the modern era is distraction. Jumping from one thing to another, and these constant dopamine hits. And the studies I've been seeing say it's not just bad for your performance or for your achievement, your ability to focus. It's just bad for your health.
Oh, for sure, for sure. No, we mentioned before, right? I was talking to Dr. Art Markman the other day, and he was talking about how we're not even able to just sit still for a minute, right? Like anytime we're waiting in line at the supermarket, or we're just waiting for anything, we're just sitting in the car, anytime we get out our phones, because we can't sit in silence, we can't sit with our own thoughts and just kind of be in the present moment. I think that's one of the hardest things to do nowadays is really be able to let go of this need to constantly take out your phone every single moment and actually just embrace life and the present moment, right?
Yeah, no, I don't know if you've had this experience. I'm thinking maybe some of your audience may relate. It's somewhat embarrassing, but I think it's hilarious. If you're out in the world and your phone has run out of batteries, yeah, but you still pull your phone out of your pocket and start reaching for the buttons to like turn on the screen and unlock it and start to go to, and like you realize it's been dead and you knew it was dead. It's just that your automated subconscious triggers and routines that you run at this point all are just like, how can I not sit here and have to be bored for even a moment? Which I think makes mindfulness a really vital part of training ourselves into happiness in the modern world. It's one of the keys. I don't think it's for everybody, but I think that it would help a lot of people if they wanted to get into it. So, not to hijack your podcast or anything like that, Max, but do you have a practice, Max? Are you into mindfulness, bud?
Oh, for sure. So like I like doing my morning ritual every morning. First of all, I kind of get up 6 a.m. usually and walk outside and just kind of do my affirmations and really get my blood flowing. Like I walk around, right? I get that energy going.
Great.
And then I like to sit down outside and meditate just for like 10-15 minutes usually. And then also just during the moment, I think sometimes like when you're walking through like the woods or when you're running like on a beautiful way, right? Like just noticing like the world and like all these amazing things, right? Yeah. I think that's sometimes what we don't really pay attention to, but just being conscious and aware of that. Because I think the challenge for many people is meditation just isn't for everyone, and that's just the reality of it. I think not everyone likes meditation, so I think sometimes finding other ways to be mindful in our lives, and I'm sure you can maybe add some more techniques or strategies for that, to really be mindful without even maybe using meditation?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think
I
about
can
that?
appreciate that for sure. I was diagnosed with ADHD. Geez, it must be a decade ago now. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, for me, I'd actually always thought that mindfulness was a bit of like hippy dippy new age poppycock. I thought it was like a little silly.
That's what most people say. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just how is sitting there doing nothing supposed to do something? Right? I always thought you had to like
Yeah.
work hard or lift weights in order to gain muscle, or put in a lot of time and effort and sweat in order to make money. Or it's usually like input output. But after the avalanche of research studies I came across, I decided it was hard to ignore the science backed benefits of a mindfulness practice. So I tried it, and what I realized is it's actually super hard work. It's really, really difficult.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, especially to stay on it. Gosh. But for me, because I had so much trouble focusing on just my breathing for 10 minutes, which would drive me crazy, I tried to find other ways to practice mindfulness. And I love what you just said. Going for a walk can definitely be a mindfulness practice. Uh, Listening to music can be a mindfulness practice. What I enjoyed most was something that's called open observation mindfulness, might be a way to say it.
What is that?
Right. Open observation mindfulness practices. What you do is you sit and you just take notice of where your mind travels. So instead of needing to constantly struggle with your attention to bring it back to just your breath, you get to let your mind go wherever it wants to, which people with ADHD, that tends to happen a lot. It jumps all over the place. Yeah. So, but
For
the
sure.
intention basically is to be present. There's an intentional aspect to the quality of your awareness. You want to really be purposeful in the way that you pay attention, and you want to be non-judgmental. You don't want to judge too heavily. You want to just notice where your mind goes, but you're free to let the mind jump from a feeling that you have on the back of your neck to a movie that you saw last night to something you need to do tomorrow. You let the mind do whatever it wants to do, and instead just adapt an intentional and non-judgmental awareness of what it's doing. So that was my way of practicing mindfulness, at least starting out, because it was much easier.
Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. And I love what you're saying about kind of, first of all, being non-judgmental with what you're focusing on.
Mm.
And then also, more importantly, letting your mind drift and just kind of having this broad awareness of just what you're focusing on. Because when I tried in the beginning, I mean, several years ago, what I always tried to do was just kind of try to hammer through, right? And just kind of like only focus on my breath and try to think of nothing else. And then I would think of something else and would beat myself up over it.
Right.
And so I would always get into this negative spiral of like, hey, I thought of something else. Now I keep thinking about why I thought of that, right? And so what you're saying here about just kind of letting go and allowing yourself to think whatever, just being aware of that. I love that. Especially for the beginning. I think when you're getting started and trying to build that habit, I think it's powerful.
Absolutely. I'm like a parrot for Tim Ferriss here, but
no, that's good.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Tim Ferriss is definitely a good person too.
He says, when you want to learn a new skill, in the beginning, look for easy wins. You don't want to have your first goal when you're learning how to rock climb be to climb Everest, because you're going to fail immediately and be like, this is not for me. It sucks. I suck at this. I never want to try again. Why set goals that are too difficult and unpleasant when it'll just get in the way of your process, right? So in the beginning, start with like a minute. Do it for like 10 seconds. Don't do it for, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to practice mindfulness for 20 minutes right now, because that's going to suck. Do not start there. Start with 1 minute as an easy entry point into the process, and just explore what it's like, whether it be to focus on the breath and more of a kind of an executive control, like focus exercise, or sit back and be an observer of your thoughts and notice where your mind wanders. That really worked for me. So I don't know if somebody's listening right now and they're thinking of some way to get started, maybe Google open observation or open monitoring meditation, and that there's some guided ones online that may help out. I think that you can probably find one on an article that I wrote about the topic on my website, taylorkreiss.com.
No, I loved what you're saying about getting small wins. And actually, BJ Fogg, he's a Stanford professor of psychology. And he's done some research on this. He calls it tiny habits. And so what he found is that the best way to actually get started building new habits is by making it so ridiculously small that it almost takes no effort, no willpower in the beginning, right? Because if you think about it, like anyone can run for a minute, right? Anyone can just, I don't know, meditate for a minute, right? One healthy snack in a day. It's, I think, when we're trying too hard right from the start, when you're trying to go to the gym for an hour every day, when you're trying to eat that perfect diet right from the beginning, that's when we fail. And so starting small, especially when you're trying something for the first time, is very powerful, like you said.
I can definitely appreciate his findings. For me, a lot of my interest in life just comes from finding a very rational way of operating. It's supposed to be what's great about humanity, supposedly at least, is that we're rational animals, right? So
we like to think of that.
Yeah, at least we delude ourselves into thinking that we are rational creatures. I do think that there's some aspect of us that allows us to achieve a greater degree of rationality with the way we live our lives.
For sure. And I think one of the biggest problems in today's society is this kind of constant need for immediate gratification, this emotional reactions to whatever is going on the outside, right? Like we all struggle with, I think, taking in those events non-judgmentally and being able to respond in a like positive way rather than just reacting to whatever is on the outside. So what are some techniques or tools that people can use to kind of increase their emotional intelligence and their ability to kind of be rational, make rational decisions in their lives rather than be guided by their emotions?
So I know of some research. I have kind of my wheelhouse where, as a generalist, I feel super confident in talking about certain topics like meaning or relationships and stuff like that. This is one that I'd heard a podcast not too long ago. It was the psychology podcast. I'll find the episode in particular so that maybe we can link to it. But the researcher was talking about a technique called emotional labeling. And what it consists of is that you just want to become a little more mindful of how you're feeling during the day. Maybe you set some iPhone reminders like 3 or 4 times during the day, a little alarm goes off, and you look at your phone and you see label your emotions, right? Maybe you wrote that. Yeah. And at that time, you just want to stop and be like, what am I feeling? And it may be anger or sadness or, overwhelming euphoric bliss. They don't need to be negative. But stopping and making a habit of just asking yourself, what am I feeling right now? It helps to form a practice where you do it more routinely throughout the day. And there's some really interesting evidence here where when you stop to label emotion, your scans of your brain change, where it like moves the location of activity from more basic and primal parts of the brain to I think it's the prefrontal cortex, where it's, we associate that with rationality or with critical thought. And so that creates a space, when you stop and you're like, oh, wow, I'm angry right now. I feel it. I notice that I'm feeling angry. And that space, I got to remember the Viktor Frankl quote. He says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our ability to make a choice. And in that choice lies our freedom and our growth. I definitely just butchered that.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah,
which is that, like, if you form a practice of getting into emotional labeling, you're more able when something happens to notice, like, wow, I'm angry right now. And instead of just reacting in kind of an automated way that you're not making like an intentional decision, you create an ability to be like, all right, yes, sure, I'm angry, but what's the right thing to do right now? And that gives you the ability to react in a way that's more in line with your best possible self, we'll say. So some way that we'll be more proud of, some way that was a little more rational, some way that was a little more emotionally intelligent.
Wow, I love this idea of labeling your emotions and really getting clear on, like, why am I feeling this way and why am I acting this way, or how do I feel like acting, and maybe how should I be acting if I was actually being rational in this. Love that idea, and also how it actually changes your brain. I love
it. Will,
that.
Yeah. That's, in terms of neuroplasticity, you start to form new habits. If we're trying to be more rational creatures, you can actually start to augment your thinking and your behavior and even your spontaneous emotions to some extent, which probably philosophically important in some way in terms of determining our identity and whether or not we're living a good life or some esoteric shit like that.
So since you already touched upon philosophy, one interesting thing, before you got your master's in positive psychology, you actually studied philosophy. So first question, who's your favorite philosopher of all time?
I'd probably point to Nietzsche or Camus. Both fall very squarely into the existential space. I've always had a pretty heavy existential bend. For me, questions that grew out of my youth were, what does it mean to live a good life? Who do I want to be? Who am I? What values do I hold near and dear to my heart that I want to bring into the world? I think that they're the most important questions we can have in life. That's at the core of my being. I think it's the reason I've become who I am. I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent. I don't talk about this too much just because people respond kind of funny. But so I had a weird upbringing where I grew up in the home of a billionaire and and surrounded by people who were like world champion tennis players and people with ridiculously successful businesses. Something that stood out for me observing a lot as a child was that these people who had everything that we think we want, like just tons of money and power and status and prestige, they were not very happy. We're not talking about a lot of very happy people.
Really?
Oh, totally. Like, I'm pretty sure this is a major reason I got into my area of study, actually, is I sat back and I noticed just constant lawsuits and a lot of strife and struggle in life with these people where we're all trying so hard to be like them. And it's maybe just not the answer kind of thing. And so that got me into philosophy, just questioning what it means to live a good life and to be happy, which led me to existentialism and then kind of eventually took me into positive psychology because in many ways it's a science of these kinds of questions.
I really want to go back to it a little bit because that sounds really fascinating. So you said they actually like weren't very happy because they kind of had their, do you think it was because they had all these new problems of like lawsuits and stuff? Why do you think that is? It was really fascinating.
I do think that was a big part of it. You know, the research shows us that making another $100 a year from your salary, it's never going to correlate like negatively with happiness. You tend to get happier when you make more money kind of thing. But there's a pretty early inflection point, and the research is a little divided on this. Some people say it's like 40,000 or 70,000 or something like that. But beyond that, your returns of happiness per dollar you make per year, it reduces pretty drastically. So, you know, especially in America, we're obsessed with making more and more money. And it's a little silly when you look at the stats.
Oh, for sure. I think once you know the research, you might want to overthink it.
Yeah, which is wild. It really that's always stuck out to me because the American cultural mythology just says you need to make more and more money and then you'll be living a good life, quote unquote. But I'll tell you just something that really stuck out with me. It was a single event. He was my stepfather, he's literally like a billionaire. He was the 11th richest man on the planet or something at one point.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. Wow. Really a super interesting guy. He like brought himself up from nothing, incredibly hardworking, very smart, but he was generally not the happiest. And something that he said to me once was, he goes, Taylor, I don't know who my friends are. And that was poignant. Wow. Yeah. I mean, really, I was like, oh shit. Because at some point when you're that wealthy and famous and powerful, like people are just cozying up to you for reasons outside of who you are as a person or wanting to be your friend just because.
Oh, I bet, yeah.
Yeah, and we know from the research in positive psychology that social relationships determine a lot of our happiness, actually. I mean, we should say correlation, maybe they're not causal kind of thing, but our relationships are really important. So for a man who had everything, quote unquote, who couldn't rely on anyone for just liking him for who he was, like that caused a lot of problems. So maybe like being a billionaire is actually kind of a problem. Maybe there's like some weird built-in issues with being a supremely wealthy human being. Sure, you can buy a yacht, but that gets kind of old pretty quickly, according to research on like the hedonistic treadmill. If people are familiar with that. But your relationships are what are more important. And what happens a lot when you become that wealthy is you become a target for shysters and charlatans. So I think just existentially that became really important for me to understand that when I try to optimize my life, quote unquote, it became very important to understand what I was optimizing for. Was I optimizing to make as much money as possible? No, definitely not. I had seen far too many people who had tons of money who were extremely unhappy in their daily lives. And instead, getting into the research and getting into the philosophy, I now I optimize for things like gratitude and honesty and meaningful work and relationships and achievement, of course, to some extent, but like meaningful achievement, something that
Yeah.
means something to me as a person rather than just putting another $100 in my bank account. I think that one of my major missions in life is to be disruptive and to break the patterns of the American society in particular, and just be like, people, like, we gotta get off this wheel. We gotta get off this train. It's not going to bring you what you think it's going to bring you.
Why do you think it is so tempting for people to only chase money? I mean, even if we see those statistics, right? Like we know that like more money after a certain point, whether it's 40,000, 70,000,
Right.
whatever it is, we know that more money after a certain point doesn't really make you happy. Why do you think it is so attractive to people?
I think that there are several theories on this. I'll give you my favorite, the one that I think is probably most accurate. I'm generally somebody who skews towards evolutionary psychology a lot of the time. The reason that we're all here right now is because our ancestors reproduced, right? Like they had kids. And something that's really attractive in a mate is having abundant resources to take care of children. It's a sign of status, which is also, in the hierarchy is really important in terms of what is attractive to people. Basically, what I'm saying is that on an evolutionary kind of animalistic level, things like money, power, and status, although they don't seem to make you all that happy, will help you reproduce. And a lot of the times, reproduction is more of a driving factor in the human psyche than happiness. Like, our brains were not really built to make us happy as much as they were to make sure that our genes are carried forward.
Oh, for sure. That's such a powerful point, I think, that you're making here, that like we're not born to be happy, right? We're born to reproduce. We're born to make kids and pass on our genes and then just kind of provide them for them until they're old enough to provide for themselves. So I love what he's saying here about we're not born to be happy. Like Tony Robbins, I think, said this, like, you're not born to be happy. Like that is your job, right? Like it's your job to take care of that. And
I love that quote.
Yeah, I think that's something that we oftentimes tend to forget, that like you're not born to be happy. You're born to reproduce. You're born for all these things, but being happy is like an internal job that we need to work on ourselves, that we consciously like need to decide, hey, this is something that is important to me, and that's something I want to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just that realization and the intention and action to do something about it can totally change someone's life, in my opinion. Our natural, like, biological basic tendencies are not leading us towards happiness. And a lot of the times those basic tendencies are preyed upon by like capitalistic societies. They're selling you that if you buy a certain product or if you chase a certain lifestyle, then you'll get a great mate. It's like you'll get hot chicks if you got an awesome car. And so that becomes our value system. That becomes the thing that we prioritize. It becomes the things that we chase. And then a lot of the time we reach a midlife existential crisis and we're like, I'm not happy. Like, why is that? I became a lawyer. I have the nice home in Beverly Hills or something like that, but I'm not a happy person. And I mean, I think that's a very rude awakening. That's a tough thing and a prevalent part of the human condition nowadays. But for anybody who's listening, or for people who have inclinations towards escaping the tyranny of capitalistic, consumeristic impulses, happiness is a skill. It's something that you work on and you get better at, like playing a violin or practicing kickboxing or something like that. It's just something that you learn about in the same way of like how to throw a proper punch, and then you practice a lot and you get better at it and it becomes second nature, so to speak. So, if you want to be happy, you got to sit and reevaluate what you're chasing and start to think a little more, I think, in terms of how can I help other people? How can I be more grateful for what I already have? How can I, do something that's personally meaningful? or feel more engaged on a daily basis rather than just how can I make more money or get a really sweet Tesla Model 3. Is that the new one? Is that the
I
hot
have
one right
no
now?
clue. I have no clue.
Okay, right.
But
So I have a
now,
tendency to go on tangential philosophical rants, so always feel
oh
free
no,
to
I love that. No, I
interrupt.
love what you're saying here,
Okay.
but kind of proactively taking charge of your happiness, because I think most people kind of assume that it's just going to come naturally. It's going to be like this automatic thing that only if only they make enough money, or if only they have like this perfect marriage, if only like they get into this school or get into that or get this job, they expect to become happy from that. But the
Mm,
reality is that happiness comes down to like the daily habits, right? Your daily habits of thinking and acting, like you mentioned before, like creating better social relationships, gratitude, meditation, working out. All of these things are the things that actually make us happy. So I think like once you realize that, and then like you said, optimize for that, I think that is very powerful. Just consciously choosing to optimize for happiness rather than all the garbage that society is telling you that you need.
amen, dude. I couldn't have said it better myself. And what's cool about all that is most of those things are free.
Exactly. Happiness
Yeah, they
doesn't
really
cost
are.
a dime, yeah. So I'm really curious, Harry, because you worked actually as the executive producer of the psychology podcast for a while. So what are some things that you learned during that time of just all of these incredible people that came on the show?
Ooh, a lot. Yeah, I think that we'd probably been around 70 episodes or so by the time that I decided to move on from the position. I don't know if he'll listen to this, but I first need to thank Scott Barry Kaufman for bringing me on as an executive producer and just for being my mentor and an awesome human being in general. That guy. He's a smart dude. He's a kind human being, and he's handsome, and all the nice things I can say about him.
I'm sure you'd be glad to hear that.
Yeah, I'll send him a clip of this if he doesn't get to it naturally. But um, yeah, no, I learned a fair amount, man. I think that things that have been especially helpful for me, someone who's philosophically obsessed and very existential in nature, I really like the episode from Tom Rath. Tom is a fascinating character. He actually spoke in my master's program at once. He came to talk to us.
Oh, wow.
He's a multiple time national bestseller. He writes in positive psychology, a lot of it with a strong philosophical bend. He, I think at the age of 16, was playing basketball, if I remember correctly, and all of a sudden went blind in one eye.
Oh, gosh.
And no, and he went to see the doctor naturally and was diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder where he gets tumors all over his body constantly and like for the whole
Gosh.
span of his life. And he was given, like 10 years to live maybe,
Mhm.
and he's lived, I think, probably 20 years longer than the time allotted to him, and is still going strong because he is
Wow.
full. I mean, he's fully embraced optimizing life for health and for happiness. His whole obsession in life has become like, how can I prolong my life? How can I make it as high a quality as possible? And I think that that's a fairly natural reaction to something like, hey, you're 16, you're going to be dead by the time you're 26.
Wow, that's hard, yeah.
It is, yeah. I mean, these are the cruel realities of the human condition. It's a fact that we are mortal beings. For me, there's a kind of freedom and philosophical significance in that has become my area of interest in particular. I have done a fair amount of research on something I call existential meditation, which I think means basically contemplating your mortality, and that there are actually a lot of goods that can come from that. It sounds weird, but like reminding myself that I'll die one day is one of the best pattern disruptors I have in my life to help me refocus my priorities. If that makes some
Wow.
sense, yeah.
That's so interesting.
I mean, it's a practice that's been around for a long time. There are forms of meditation where you sit around and you contemplate your mortality. Obviously, to existential philosophers, it's been very important to think about the fact that you'll die one day. There have been some empirical studies, actually, that if you have people journal about their goals before and after thinking about their mortality, they shift from what in the literature we refer to as extrinsic goals to intrinsic goals. And to explain that a little further, basically, when you think about your mortality, a lot of the time you might go from my goals are to make $1 million a year and to have a nicer car to I want to have a job that's fulfilling to me, or I want to spend more time with my family. And that's really important, because usually the intrinsic goals are the things that bring you more happiness. So I'm not sure what the mechanism is exactly, but sitting and thinking about the fact that you are a finite being and that you'll not be here forever helps to distill what's really important in life and to motivate you to action in actually chasing those kinds of things. If you're worried about whether or not you're going to be happy, you're going to live well, or if you're going to have any regrets on your deathbed, stop for a second and be like, holy hell, I'm going to die one day, and write down what are some things I need to do before that happens. And a lot of the time that'll probably direct you towards the things that are most personally meaningful and will bring you the most happiness.
Well, I love that, I have to say, especially about like kind of making sure that at the end of the day, right, when you're lying on your deathbed, that you don't have any regrets, right? Because I think the challenge for most people is we're kind of living in this reactive state where we're just kind of automatically like going through the motions day after day, month after month, year after year, right? Without ever reflecting on like, what is it actually that like at the end of my life, what do I want to look back on, right? Yeah. And so like you mentioned before, like we set all these extrinsic goals, like I want to have $1 million or I want to have this car. But what really matters to you at the end of the life is not the money, right? You don't want to be the richest man in a graveyard, right? Like Steve Jobs said, I think.
Oh, I like that.
You wanna have a life where you can look back and you have all these amazing memories and experiences and people around you, and you've done some incredible things that aren't just necessarily about success, but about fulfillment, and that actually forced you to become a better version of yourself. So I love what he's saying here about just kind of reflecting on one's own mortality. Love that.
It's like I'm a generalist in positive psychology. I think I mentioned I know a little about a lot kind of thing, but there's areas where I'm more interested and have kind of naturally learned a little more. And there's an entire field of existential positive psychology that was started popularly by Paul Wong. And I think that this intervention, as we might call it, this activity, isn't for everyone. Like for some people, thinking about their mortality just causes them terrible anxiety and they probably shouldn't do it. But for a lot of us, and especially for me, it's a great way, I think, to distill some valuable goals and to motivate action. So, if we're talking about something that resonated with me or something I learned from my position as executive producer, I would say listen to the Tom Rath episode of the Psychology Podcast with Scott Berry-Kaufman.
Wow, for sure. I'll definitely go check that out right after this. That sounds really fascinating. But so contemplating one's death is one thing. What are some other interventions or strategies that you've used in your life? Similar, interesting things like that?
In the master's program, it was a never-ending flood of interventions that we could try out and see what did the most for us personally. And again, I think it's highly individualized. For me, practicing open monitoring meditation was somehow more valuable than like focused attention meditation. Even if you want to try meditation, it may not even resonate with everybody. I think that one that did a lot for me was, it's called a WHOOP intervention. Okay. Yeah, it's from Gabrielle Ottenigen. I really hope I'm saying that correctly. And I think that she may be German, so it sounds a little more like
I know about her, yeah.
Okay, right on. Yeah, so she had spent a lot of her life studying how our thoughts about the future affect our behaviors. And through, I don't want to misquote, but it must be over a decade of research, she created an acronym and a very practical strategy for planning around goals. And like, if you're into it, I can lay it out. You into it?
Oh, for sure. I'd love that.
Cool. So the WHOOP strategy, it starts out with W, and that stands for wish. Okay. That's like your open statement of a desired future state. Like, what do you want? Maybe we can walk through one right now, even. If you got some goal, Max, something that you're wanting to get accomplished?
Oh, for sure. Let's do it. So my main goal with this show actually is to get Tony Robbins on the show, to meet him in person.
Hell yeah, cool. I can dig. So that's a pretty clear statement. But that's a great wish. That's a statement of a desired future state. So we'd write that down as a W. The second letter is O, which is outcome. So at this point in the strategy, I would ask you to imagine the best possible scenario, like the best outcome of the situation. If you were to wander off into your imagination and be like, wow, that wish really turned out awesome. What would that look like if you can paint me a picture?
Wow, I would say it's just this day where I like fly to his house, meet him in person, get the chance to kind of interview him on his life, on all the amazing work he's done, sit down with him for maybe 2 or 3 hours and just learn from him and soak in his kind of energy and enthusiasm.
Cool. And how does that make you feel?
That'll be like my perfect day.
Awesome. Okay. I mean, that's a great statement of how it would make you feel. That's motivating, right? You feeling energized?
Oh, for sure.
It's great for that. So we're basically at the point of positive visualization, which was a really important part of a lot of self-help writing for a long time. Was, you got to say what you want and you got to imagine it. It's kind of like The Secret. There have been some studies though that Gabrielle has conducted that shows stopping right here causes problems. That I think that she had monitored people who were trying to recover from hip surgery and women who were trying to lose weight. And like the experimental group, they told them just to really think positively about their future goal and imagine it. And they found that those people lost less weight and regained less mobility in their hips. So that's a really counterintuitive finding, right? That thinking positively is somehow actually might hinder you in your ability to achieve what you're after. It flies totally in the face of a lot of self-help work. And that's why I think the scientific or evidence-based approach is super important with all of these things that we're talking about when it comes to living a good life. But what she did find is that adding the last O and P tended to produce greater rates of achievement than just thinking positively. So we'll continue through the WHOOP acronym. And this is a part called mental contrasting. So you've thought about what you wanted and what that would look like if it really came true to the fullest extent. But now we're going to contrast that dream, that ideal, with what actually is, so to speak. And the second O in the WHOOP acronym is obstacles.
Quite a bit there.
So, yeah, no, I mean, there are for a lot of us in most of our dreams, dude. I've been trying to write a book for years and I need to sit down and do a WHOOP. I think most of us on a daily basis have so many wishes and yearnings and dreams for just 1,000 different things we could want on a daily basis. There's no way to achieve all of them. But this process seems to help people. And I think that the obstacle part, at least speaking from empirical evidence, is helpful. So like, what are some impediments to your ability to achieve that goal of like flying to meet Tony Robbins and interviewing him about his life and all that stuff?
Well, first of all, I guess just kind of getting on his not vision board. How's it called? Just kind of reaching his attention, right?
I like that. Yeah.
And the way to do it is you're building an audience, building a tribe, like I'm doing here with this podcast, just building this massive, amount of people that are interested in what I'm saying, interested in this podcast. And then with that, having the kind of ability and influence to eventually reach them.
Very well put, dude. I love that. So you're actually happening into the P aspect, which is planning. And that's why like this system is super effective. What you do is you reach a point where you're really energized because of the wish and the outcome. It sounds wonderful and we want that.
Yeah.
But then you contrast it with reality and you're like, but what's standing in my way? And you actually list out a bunch of things that are like, well, shit, if I'm being realistic, Tony Robbins only has 24 hours a day and he's kind of an important dude.
Oh, yeah.
He can't talk to everybody. But these are the realities of these situations. Is like, these are very famous people. Like they're multiple time national bestsellers and are making a ton of money because they're super special and they're not going to talk to everybody. And so it's kind of a tough reality to face. But once you have the obstacles listed out, and if I'm being super detailed right now, this is a lot for just to throw at you, but you should bounce back and forth a little bit from the outcome to the obstacle so that you flush out really great things that you want to happen, but some obstacles that might get in the way of that, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
so really making sure that you're contrasting those two kind of realities of like what do I want, but at the same time what's holding me back, and then how can I overcome that? I love that process.
Exactly right, dude. You got that
Wow.
almost entirely too quick.
Yeah,
Yeah, but like it's if you use this for like losing weight or something, like your outcome would be like, yeah, I don't know, I go to dinner and I order the right stuff, and then you're like, well, there's an obstacle. My friends like to go to Fatburger. How am I supposed to do that? And then what that does is that helps you to plan. That's the last part of the Whoop process. Is it helps you to say, if my friends want to go to Fatburger, then I will get the veggie burger, with the healthiest option on the menu. Or I will eat beforehand, knowing that I'm going to spend time with them later because they love to go to Fatburger. And as funny as this kind of very basic planning sounds, there's a lot of research to show that they're called implementation intentions. If you've got if-then statements, like if my friends want to go to Fatburger, then I will do this. That helps you in the moment make the right decision because you planned ahead of time.
no, I really love that process that you're describing here, because I think that the challenge that most people have is they set these kind of unrealistic expectations or goals, right? Of like everything's going to be so easy. Like I'm just going to decide now I eat healthy for the next month, and then it's going to happen. But the reality is that circumstances happen, and like there's obstacles in the way. And I think, especially like you touched upon, like The Secret, right? It's a really famous movie kind of talking about positive thinking, right? You should always visualize your goals and think positively. But the problem, I think, is that if we only do that, if we only think about like all the positive stuff, all the amazing things that are going to happen, we completely neglect that there's obstacles in life, that there's negative things happening in the life. And so the process that you're describing here with really looking at the obstacles and then making a plan to overcome them, I love that, because that gives you a much more realistic chance at actually succeeding at that.
There's a lot of frustration, and I imagine you feel this also as a fellow dude who who is in the area of life optimization, where there are a lot of people who claim to be self-help artists or coaches or what have you, and they're just kind of reiterating stuff that sounds good, and they're doing a lot of damage. In my opinion, I don't want to get down on too many people, but screw those guys.
Very true. Yeah.
Because they're like, you can't just tell people to think positively when there's a fair amount of empirical research showing that hinders people's ability to reach their goals. You're doing damage at that point. And I don't think that every positive intervention needs to be science backed, quote unquote, but you gotta try your hardest not to just give out shit that sounds good but doesn't work. And that's why people in positive psychology we don't like The Secret very much, because it just doesn't seem to be true.
I've had so many people mention that movie just because of that dislike of like only think positive. So I love what you're saying here, and I think it's very true. Like, of course, not everything has to be entirely science based, but I think having that foundation of like where like science actually agrees with that, and science has actually found that what I'm saying is true, I think is very important when like you actually want to help people. Is like make sure that like this doesn't just work with me, but actually over like with a broad variety of people in a broad variety of circumstances, right?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, statistics averages across populations. Like we need someone to check that claim, and we need someone to vet it in experimental studies with placebo and controls, like over lots and lots of people, before we start writing books about how you should just think positively. Because it like the people in the weight loss study or the people who are trying to regain mobility after hip surgery, it might be doing more harm than good. And with Tenogen's work, we see that it may not be great to just think positively. As often as we hear about that and we need to create vision boards, the better way to operate is more likely to think about what you want. Imagine how awesome that would be, and gain motivation from it. But then very realistically and seriously, consider what stands in your path and then plan for it. If you're trying to lose weight, imagine how good it would feel to do so and to look the way you want and to be as healthy as you want. And then actually think about the fact that it's not as easy as, I'm going to lose weight. it involves, I'm going to cook for myself like 2 to 3 meals of every day. And I'm going to cook the right stuff. It may not be as delicious as I want, but I'm going to plan for that. I'm going to learn how to cook more effectively. I'm going to put herbs and spices on my food in a way that makes it more delicious for me. I'm going to create an entire plan that tells me how I need to behave in order to achieve my goals. And that's how you achieve your goal. It's not to just like think positively about it. What were we talking about? I forget the original question now, but that's right on. And Max, by the way, I think that you can totally achieve speaking.
Oh, thank you. I'm really excited.
Seriously, no doubt in my mind, man. I met Lewis Howes.
Oh, wow. You really met them all, didn't you? Wow.
That one was purely luck. Like I've had the great fortune in my career at the University of Pennsylvania to like meet some legendary psychologists like Steven Pinker and Baumeister and stuff, just in virtue of being at the Positive Psychology Center. But Lewis was I was trying to get my car in a parking lot.
Don't tell me you bumped him.
And he like, like he happened to be there. I was like, holy hell, that dude is tall. Oh, and it's Lewis Howes. That's Lewis Howes. And I was like, oh man, you're doing a lot of good in the world. And like, he's apparently the kind of guy who'll come over and give you a hug immediately and talk to you about, his rise to great power and success, which has been
that's amazing.
I got a lot of respect for that guy, actually.
I love that. That's so cool. So let's shift gears a little bit, get a little more personal. I'm really curious. Do you have a favorite failure in your life? Anytime that you failed at something, you weren't as good as you wanted to be, but it later propelled you forward and actually helped you raise your game?
First of all, I might just say that I like the question. In America, you're taught to never fail, and that causes real problems for people. They're so busy trying not to fail that they never even try something because they think there's no way it could happen. So why would I even try? And I mean, that's a huge impediment. If you're trying to write a book and you're like, wow, and nobody's going to read this or it's going to get horrible critical reviews, why would you ever even attempt it? So, I like the idea of a favorite fail. Let's celebrate it. Yeah. So I'm going to celebrate my favorite fail, which was I was at UCLA. I took an accounting class, and in a very literal sense, I failed. I failed that class.
Oh, yeah, wow.
Big time. Oh, yeah. I was just ingesting enough caffeine to blast a rhino into space and not sleeping for days during my final, not studying. And that entire 2-hour process of taking that midterm and the final were both just awful. And I failed. Yeah. I think that it helped me, though. The whole process scared the hell out of me. I was in apocalyptic kind of catastrophizing mode after that final. I knew that I had failed, and my thoughts around that time were like, I'm screwed. Yeah. What am I going to do? I may have gotten into a respectable college, but now my GPA is tanked and there's no way in hell I'm getting into any kind of graduate school. How am I going to get a good job? My life was spiraling before my eyes in a borderline melodramatic sense, but like I had never failed a class before, and that was rough. What I learned from the experience, though, and I think it honestly took me a couple of years at least, was it didn't matter at all. It didn't do anything. Like, unless I was mentioning this right now to whoever is listening, no one would even know it happened.
Yeah, that is an interesting thing, right? Like we always like have this very short-term perspective of like, oh my God, like this is the worst thing in the world. But then thinking about it, like even like a year later, or sometimes even a month or a week later, we're like, we don't even think about it anymore. Like it has absolutely zero impact on like the long-term game of our life, right?
Seriously, I've not thought about it for years even, but it taught me a really important lesson, for anyone out there who might be in a similar situation. I actually didn't even get into my master's program the first or second time that I tried. Like, there was somebody who was in my year of the MAP program. It's a Master's of Applied Positive Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. He didn't get in 8 times.
And she still kept applying every year? Wow.
Yes. For 8 years, this person did not get in and kept applying. And, as a tribute to one of our teachers, Angela Duckworth, who wrote the book Grit recently, like that dude is gritty. Like that guy got it done. He kept going. He was so passionate and just continued to persevere that after 8 years, he got into the program. He got what he wanted.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, the lesson that I learned, I think, from my failure, my favorite failure, is just that failing it might actually do some good in your life. As strange as that sounds, like just totally and royally screwing up may teach you a lot about how to operate in the future and how to just be okay and happy with not always doing your best work. It happens. You're a human. There's nothing wrong with that. And
yeah, for sure. Screw-ups happen, so let's just move on. So Taylor, over the last 5 years in your own life, what new belief, behavior, habit has improved your life the most?
Yeah, so William James, he was a very popular philosopher. He was, I think, the first person in the U.S. to teach a class on psychology. So he's kind of a big deal. But he had a great quote that has changed my life ever since I heard it, which was, how does it go now? It says that our greatest weapon against anxiety or depression is our ability to choose our thoughts.
Love that.
And yeah, no, that has really done a lot for me in life. For people who are familiar with Stoicism or cognitive behavioral therapy, they'll recognize how important our thoughts are for determining our experience
it's everything.
of reality.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Yeah. Like, unless you're seriously getting your nails pulled off your fingers, sorry for such an explicit example, like that's a very physical reaction I don't think you have much control over. You could take two people who are very similar and in very similar situations where they both lose a job, right? For the one person, that could be a horribly upsetting, anxious, depressive situation. They're thinking, how am I going to support myself? I'm terrible because I couldn't maintain a basic level of income. What's wrong with me? I'm going to die poor and alone. I like just think those thoughts for a second and you will feel terrible. Sure, yeah. I guarantee it. Those are rough. That will have a very profound effect on your emotions, let alone your behaviors. Because at that point, a lot of us start drinking heavily or doing something to self-medicate. It can turn into a spiral very quickly. You could take another person, though, who had the exact same situation and even a fairly similar personality profile or psychology, or if they're thinking, listen, I can always get another job. I'm a talented person. Maybe I screwed up once, or hey, maybe my boss was just a jerk and he couldn't understand my value. I will take 2 weeks to lick my wounds and relax, and then I will find another job. Max, tell me the difference that you think would be in effect there. Like, that person would be more likely to
get a job. I mean, I'm sure, because it's the whole perspective shift. And
right.
All of a sudden, instead of being frustrated about it, you decide you get proactive about it, right? And you decide hey, this is what I can do about it, and there's actually a possibility, an opportunity in here.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, seriously, the distinction, the difference between person A and person B, just in the way that they're thinking, makes a difference in night and day. Versus, are they going to sink in a spiraling depression and be dysfunctional and unproductive? Or are they going to actually, in a weird way, maybe even achieve a sense of joy and happiness as they pursue something that was more meaningful and maybe even remunerative? Maybe they'll make even more money at their next job. It has made the difference of I want to say night and day again, but I just use that.
I get what you mean. Yeah, for sure.
It's a big difference.
Yeah, and it also goes back to the point you were making before about just failing, right? Because oftentimes, all the people they interviewed have had some world champions in sports climbing and triathlon on the show, and all of them said that it was oftentimes the biggest failures, the biggest setbacks in their lives that actually made them dive deeper into their true self and really get more out of their true potential. So oftentimes it is those failures. It is getting losing that job, right? That oftentimes propels people forward. And so it is oftentimes these negative things that later we turn into positive things if we choose to create that perspective for ourselves. I think that's a key here, right?
Yes, super important. I do think that if you are the kind of person who's listening to this podcast and you listen to this idea and you're the kind of person to absorb it and put it into action, then yes, this will make a definite difference in the quality of your life. Are you thinking the kinds of thoughts that are unproductive that are probably more inclined to make you feel depressed and upset? Or are you going to make the choice to feel better? It's a hard choice sometimes, but like push yourself into a realm where you're going to try and be as productive with your thoughts as possible. Try and think thoughts like, I'm liberated now. I'm going to get another job. I am worthwhile, rather than I suck and
Yeah.
and I deserve this or something. It will make a world of difference if you really want to.
Oh yeah, and I think one big aspect here is that also, like, I mean, you touched upon it a little bit before, but just realizing that despite circumstances and despite maybe genetics or your past or whatever, we always have a choice to change our lives for the better. We always have a choice to just move a little bit in the right direction again, no matter where you are right now. So it's just taking that first little step, whether it's being grateful for something or just going outside and being mindful, whatever it is, just making that first step of like towards a positive direction, I think is powerful.
Another way to state it, I think it was Marcus Aurelius, and I love the Stoics. He said, it's not the external issue that's the problem; it's your assessment of it. It's not the problem itself. Like, two people lose the job, have similar psychologies. It's how you thought about it. It's, am I going to die poor and alone, or am I going to flourish and find an even unprecedented sense of happiness and joy? A lot of it has to do with the way you think. Adjust how you think, and you might just change the way you live.
So Taylor, before I ask my final question, where can people connect with you online?
I always love to self-promote, as someone may have noticed if they've been listening thus far.
You get a chance now.
So I would say primarily just go to taylorkreiss.com. It's Taylor is Taylor, and then Kreiss is KREISS.com. Otherwise, I have some guest interviews on the Psychology podcast, or I just email me. How about that? It's my name at gmail.com. So it's, again, Taylor, Taylor, Kreiss, KREISS.com.
Awesome. So I put that also in the show notes. So final question, what does mental mastery mean to you?
So I feel like I could get semantic and try and analyze the terms, but like in my own life, the idea of mental mastery means trying to gear my thoughts towards being productive as often as possible. That's about it. I mean, like, I'm going to fail a lot, and that's just human. We're fallible and we screw up. We're emotional beings. We don't always have control of our thoughts and our actions. But rather than sulking to the point of just being totally unproductive or using my time in a way that is not working towards my best possible life, I just, as often as possible, would like to master my mind, in the sense of pushing myself towards doing what's best for me and becoming my best possible self.
Love that. Thank you.